If I had to pick a group of fitness influencers who know the least about fitness as a whole, it'd have to be bodybuilders without a doubt. Don't get me wrong, they do know a lot about bodybuilding because of course that's what they specialize in, but when it comes to other aspects of fitness like conditioning, functional strength, power, or rehab, their knowledge is lacking to say the least. But for some reason, this doesn't stop them from trying to talk about these topics, so I figured I'd look at a couple bodybuilders who should have stayed in their own lane.
Isometrics are a staple here at Rise Movement. We use them all the time to help increase strength and stamina at different joint angles.
Oh, God. Isometrics are one of the worst objective ways to train. Technically speaking, there's an infinite number of joint angles between something like here and something like here. If you train at only very specific angles with isometrics, you do get that sort of specificity response. So if you want to be ultra strong right here, it's good to train right here. But if you do dynamic work, which means you have a concentric component and an eccentric component, then you get stronger and develop more general ability to have stamina through that entire range of motion. And because acting for physical roles is such a diverse thing, you have to basically be totally in charge of your body. You guys see that athleticism? Ooh. You have to be totally in charge of your body and be able to master it through every conceivable way it can be moved. And isometric holds don't prepare your joints for that kind of pounding. And let me tell you, preparing for pounding, I'll cancel that one.
First, we're starting off with my boy Marlon Israetel. It blows my mind how this guy has a PhD in sports physiology, yet knows nothing about sports performance and always talks about hypertrophy. And of course, here's the perfect example of what happens when this guy tries to talk about sports performance. I mean, these guys are actors, so technically it's not sports performance, but they are talking about isometrics, which are incredibly important for athletes. While some of the things he says are correct, the application is off, and the claim that isometrics are one of the worst objective ways to train is pretty crazy. Marlon, buddy, just because something isn't great for bodybuilding doesn't mean it can't be great for athletes. The isometric phase is where the body must absorb and stabilize force. Think of it as the energy transfer station, and it plays a large role in explosive movements. Although the isometric phase isn't where you generate force, it's often the place where you lose force. So the more you can own this phase, the greater your power output and movement efficiency is, and of course this is really important for athletes. Marlon's claim that isometrics help you at specific joint angles is correct, but his phrasing is super misleading. He makes it seem like a bad thing when it's actually a great benefit of isometric training if you use it correctly. Isometric training isn't about using isometrics to build full range of motion strength or hypertrophy. They are used to strategically build stiffness, stability, and explosive power in key sport-specific joint angles. Think of grappling positions for MMA fighters or ankle isometrics for runners. So yes, isometrics are angle specific, but if you train the right angles with intention, the carryover to performance is massive. Also, if you want direct access to me and like-minded people, be sure to check out my brand new free community in the description. But the main reason why Marlon seems to hate isometric training isn't because isometric training sucks, but it's because dynamic training is supposedly better. First of all, Marlon doesn't seem to understand that isometric training recruits more motor units and allows for more force production than traditional resistance training, so it definitely has its benefits. Second, why is he putting isometric training against dynamic training like they're some sort of rivals? Isometric training is not meant to replace dynamic work, nor should it. It's just a useful training tool that should complement a great routine. To be fair to Marlon, he did say a lot of things that were correct, but his application was off, and to be honest, it's the most important part. If I go to a restaurant, I don't care how much my chef knows about cooking, I just want my steak to taste good.
Got a bit of golfer's elbow. Now I'm gonna be training some delts, arms, a little bit of back, and just training around it, because I think that's one of the best ways to go about rehabbing anything, sticking to your normal training schedule as closely as possible. So gonna be doing some front raises and seeing what we can do for arms today.
So now we have a bodybuilder trying to rehab his own injury. Raise your hand if you thought he was gonna go about this correctly. You raising your hand? Get the fuck out of my classroom. Now back to you guys who have some common sense. He did not go about this correctly, and it's such a weird way to rehab an injury. Bro said one of the best ways to rehab an injury is working around the injury. That's like saying the best way to cure your caffeine addiction is working around it. I know that example sounds stupid, but that's because that's literally what this kid said. The best way to fix something apparently is to not address it directly. While it's way better to work around the injury than push through it, that's not really saying much. Although this may work for some injuries, just avoiding the problem isn't gonna solve it. The best way to address any tendinopathy like this is through slow eccentric loading of the affected tendon, with golfer's elbow being tendinopathy of the wrist flexors. So working the wrist/finger flexors and wrist pronators eccentrically being the best way to go about golfer's elbow. This idiot then goes about his workout routine and says this.
Game plan is really just to train the muscles that support the elbow as best I can while my elbow is still healing. Curls are feeling fine right now, so we're gonna knock out some heavy curls.
Bro, stop trying to act like you know what you're talking about. Bro thinks bicep curls are gonna rehab this injury just because it crosses the elbow joint. First of all, the biceps aren't the main dynamic stabilizer of the elbow joint. And second, golfers' elbow is tendinopathy of the wrist flexors, not the biceps. So doing bicep curls doesn't directly address this stressed tendon and in many cases can make it worse. To be fair to this guy, at least his advice isn't god awful. But if you don't know about rehab, you probably shouldn't be talking about it. So you watching the video, don't go to Bodybuilders for rehab advice.
If you are an athlete, that goofy functional core training gets absolutely shit on by these two movements.
So this guy's been showing up on my feed a lot recently, and he's essentially just a bodybuilding jiu-jitsu guy. And to be fair, a lot of his advice is actually pretty good, but where he fails is trying to make bodybuilding and bodybuilding exercises seem like they're great for athletic performance. First, I do want to throw out there that he's competing in a sport that's notorious for steroid use, so I can't really take his bodybuilding advice that seriously. Second, the best athletes in the world don't train like bodybuilders for a reason. In this video, this guy tells you not to do the functional core exercises and do cable crunches and deadlifts instead, with cable crunches being a good choice to build dynamic trunk flexion strength, and deadlifts being a great choice to hit the back extensors. Saying that these are the two best core movements is a stretch. First, I'll start with the cable crunches. Listen, there's nothing wrong with dynamic ab work, but this guy's implying that it's better than anti-extension work, which I'm guessing is involved in this functional core training that he's referring to. For athletes, anti-extension is more foundational and sport relevant than doing some crunches. As I stated earlier in this video, the isometric phase is the energy transfer station and is where we lose force. Athletes need to be able to control the pelvis and rib cage under high force. Think of sprinting, jumping, change of direction, that kind of stuff. In these examples, the core must resist excessive lumbar extension. During these movements, you don't necessarily want spinal flexion, but you want stiffness for force transfer, which is directly trained with anti-extension work. Another con of trunk flexion work when comparing it to anti-extension work is that it uses your abs in isolation. While isolation work has its place, your abs don't work in isolation outside the gym. Anti-extension work doesn't just train your abs. It teaches your whole body to resist collapse and maintain structure so you can transfer power. And speaking of isolation, the rectus abdominis isn't a major player when it comes to core stability, with muscles like the obliques and transverse abdominis playing a larger role. Now onto the deadlift, and the deadlift is great. You guys know how much I love the deadlift. And I have no problem with this exercise selection, but I do have a problem with the routine as a whole. Where's the oblique training? As I stated earlier, the obliques play a larger role in core strength than the abs, because they are larger and attached to the entire pelvis and rib cage, so they play a larger role in core stability. And of course, we can't forget rotation. If you want a strong core, you need strong obliques. So make sure you train rotation / resist rotation and resist lateral flexion.
Conditioning work with your strength work is going to kill your gains.
Probably not.
I agree with Jeff here. You may be wondering which Jeff I agree with, and I low-key agree with both and disagree with both of them. This is quite a long short, so strap yourself in.
Early science said that since weightlifting is anabolic and cardio is catabolic, then cardio will burn your muscle away. But since then, higher quality long-term research has shown that you can balance cardio with weightlifting as long as you do these three things. First, you do your cardio after weight training or at a separate time. It's totally fine to do a quick 5 to 10 minute cardio warm-up before lifting, but if you do your full-blown cardio session before weights, you might take a strength hit.
So first I want to address the claim that cardio will burn muscle away. Just like Jeffrey said, it won't, but it can impact your progress, which I'll get into later. So this claim is kinda right, but also kinda wrong. Just because you're doing cardio after training doesn't get you off the hook like Jeffrey's implying here. It depends on what cardio you do and the volume / intensity you do. According to well-respected conditioning expert Joel Jamieson, if one of your goals is to increase lean muscle mass, you want to avoid performing a high volume of aerobic work immediately following your strength training sessions. Research shows that after heavy strength work, there's a large increase in hormones that stimulates subsequent protein synthesis that is integral to muscle growth. When a high volume of aerobic work, or even worse, a high volume of lactic work is performed too soon after strength work, the result is that hormonal output can be decreased, thus protein synthesis is lowered. So if you plan on doing a high volume of aerobic work or lactic work post-workout, so for lactic work think HIIT training, then yes, cardio will impact muscle growth, not stop it, but it will impact it. This is why Joel Jamieson recommends avoiding a high volume of aerobic or lactic work for 24 to 48 hours post-workout. And this reasoning is why I recommend doing cardio on a completely separate day than weightlifting. You may be wondering what is meant by high volume of aerobic training, and this is roughly 45 to 90 minutes of aerobic work. If you do low volume, so like 15 to 30 minutes, you're fine. Just don't overdo it if your main goal is strength or hypertrophy. And for those of you guys that think that jogging counts as aerobic work, make sure you track your heart rate, because the way most people jog, it could be considered lactic work, which Joel says is even worse than a high volume of aerobic work.
Second, when doing high-intensity cardio, try to stick with low-impact options like cycling or the elliptical. High-impact cardio, like running and basketball, are still great. Just try to separate them from your leg days by at least a day or two, and don't overdo them.
So for high intensity, as I mentioned earlier, it will likely fall under the lactic work category, so it can impact gains. It's also quite fatiguing, so if not managed properly, it will impact your future workout performance, which obviously impacts gains.
But most importantly, even if there's a little interference, you'll still make great gains as long as you're lifting consistently, sleeping well, and eating enough.
He's right, there is a little interference, but he kind of downplays it too much because if you don't structure your training properly, there can be a pretty significant interference. There are multiple ways that cardio can interfere with strength and muscle growth. First is recovery interference, which is a no-brainer. Endurance training can increase systemic fatigue, which will obviously impact your workouts. But the main interference is from something literally called the interference effect. The interference effect refers to the phenomenon where endurance training can negatively impact the development of strength and muscle mass when combined with strength training. In simpler terms, if you're trying to build strength/hypertrophy and endurance at the same time, the endurance training might hinder your progress in building muscle and getting stronger. This is because different training sends different adaptation signals to the body. When you combine too many, your body essentially tries to balance between them, which can blunt gains. The interference effect happens because essentially training for endurance and training for strength and power causes conflicting demands on the body. This is a big reason why I tend to lean towards block training, especially for high-level people. If you're the average person just looking to build general fitness, you can improve both just fine as long as you manage them, but people at a high level of fitness and of course athletes should separate them. So essentially he's right that you can do strength training and endurance training with minimal interference, but you do have to program them correctly. Keep in mind that the interference effect can slow down progress, but it isn't a dead stop and it's not like you won't see any progress. With many athletes balancing it out the best they can because they have lots of practices and limited time for strength and conditioning sessions. And hypertraining people still make progress even though they're trying to improve both at the same time. I don't know if it's because they don't know any better or they're just trying to be in decent shape, which I can respect. Make sure you pick one goal, focus your training efforts on that, and maybe have a secondary goal that you work on and try and maintain it by doing less volume and less frequency.
Bodybuilder, you're gonna look good, but you're not gonna play good. It's two different types of muscle. Empty muscle and explosive muscle. Bodybuilders, they're training high reps, isolated lifts, hypertrophy focused. It looks good. Yes, their muscle grows, but most of it is filled with water. That's where the pump comes in. Explosive muscle, you have lower rep. Explosive focus, you're going for strength and power. You're training to perform like an athlete.
We should ban women from talking. Now, in all seriousness, 99% of people who go to the gym, when you're lifting weights, I would highly recommend training like a bodybuilder. If you want to be more like an athlete, be more athletic. And when I say be like an athlete, for 99.999% of people, what that purely means is their perspective of going on a run. When you're in the gym, train like a bodybuilder because you will build your muscle up. You are less likely to get injured outside of the gym. And yes, this athletic type of training approach has its value. Sports specifically, training for that. Obviously, high rocks training is different type of lifting than it is bodybuilding. But 99% of people would purely benefit from training in the gym like a bodybuilder to build your muscles up so they are significantly less likely and less prone to injury than just doing the choice of cardio that you want outside of the gym, whether it is swimming, biking, running, walking, whatever it may be. You don't need to overcomplicate things or do these weird athletic type of strength movements, etc., to simply become more athletic.
Okay, again, there's a lot to unpack here, but we'll start off with the girl who's not even a bodybuilder who claims that there are two different kinds of muscle. I really hope she meant this metaphorically because there's no such thing as empty and explosive muscle. Muscle is muscle. It's just the neural adaptations you get from training a particular way that make you more explosive. I'm not gonna go in on her too much for this and the dosages, but yeah, she's wrong. Now into the bodybuilder because we all know I love correcting bodybuilders and not nutrition girls. But what the heck is this dude talking about? Did bro really claim that being an athlete is the equivalent of going on a run? Being an athlete equals being the complete package, not just going on a freaking run. Athletes need to be great aerobically, so I guess going on a run, but they also have to have a developed neuromuscular system, a developed anaerobic lactic system, and anaerobic alactic system. So according to this idiot, athletes don't need any anaerobic development, and all they do is go on runs and play at a low intensity. This is one of the first times I've heard a bodybuilder try and claim that bodybuilding is the best way for the average person to train to lower injury risk. Bodybuilding equals isolation exercises, exercises, stable movements, and always moving slow. Does that sound like something that will build a resilient body, bud? You need coordination, stability, and the ability to react quickly outside the gym, all of which are qualities better trained with athletic/functional movements, not bodybuilding exercises. If this video has taught you one thing, it's that bodybuilders need to stay the fuck away from talking about sports and rehab. If you want to be in better shape, you want to train like an athlete, even if you're not an athlete. In sports, the stronger, leaner, and better conditioned athlete is typically the better performing athlete. And similarly, the stronger, leaner, and better conditioned adult will typically live a longer, healthier life. A really good example is power training for older people. The first physical quality we lose in old age isn't strength, it's power. Unless there's a different archetype of bodybuilder I've never heard of, bodybuilders don't train power, buddy. Athletes do. So just like I would an athlete, I would give an older patient plyometrics, but of course, lower intensity ones and simpler ones. I don't care if you're a kid, an adult, a middle-aged person, or an old person. If you're looking to improve health and longevity, training like an athlete is the best way to train. And those are some bodybuilders who should have stayed in their own lane. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And I don't know if you've noticed, but fitness influencers are getting dumber, and I recently made a video on them, which you should check out.